Thank you for coming here today. Do you want to give us a little bit of your background, what you've done in the past, your work, what you do now? It'd be great.
Sure, thanks, Steve. Great pleasure to be here talking to you. Pleasure with the Moon Surgical team. So my background really is that I started off as a laparoscopic surgeon, and if I go back during my training, it was an era where we were moving from open to laparoscopic, and very much found laparoscopy was the type of surgery that I wanted to do and was interested in. And very quickly we began to hear rumblings of robotics is coming. And in the UK in particular, we didn't really take off with robotics for quite a while. And going back a decade or so, there were perhaps only one or two systems in the UK. So I decided to go abroad, did a 2 to 3 month stint in a robotic high volume center, and became one of the first few surgeons in London that was offering robotic surgery. And from that, my interest in the whole robot developed. So not just really the technical side of things, but also what else can we do with the robot? How can we make robotic platforms ubiquitous, as it were? And that's really the clinical side. And when you get into the nitty-gritty of these machines, often you start seeing research opportunities. And being a clinical academic, I have a research team that very much investigates surgical tech. I started getting into what can we do? How can we make these platforms better? Or how can we make platforms that we could use with the robot or without the robot? So that's my sort of hybrid side of clinical and academic put together.
So you talk about hybrid. I mean, yes, robotics has come a long way, but not everything is done robotics today. I mean, what sort of the practice, for your practice, do you do sort of robotic versus manual?
It's interesting because if you look at how robotics was originally popularized, we were trying to, in my specialty of colorectal, we were trying to take complex cases and saying we should use the robot for complex cases. And whether it be an esophagectomy or whether it be a rectal cancer resection. But really, if you think about it, there are many of the advantages and benefits that we get from robotics that we can use for the more high volume cases, whether that be a hernia, whether that be a gallbladder. So it's about picking and choosing the right cases. And although I started perhaps with the more difficult cases, my practice very quickly moved on to doing those more high volume cases like hernia, for example.
Okay. And in laparoscopy, I go around the world and I talk to a lot of people. One of the sort of, I want to call it a dirty little secret, but a thing about physicians is they do get fatigue. It's tiring. Actually doing laparoscopy is physically demanding and mentally demanding. Tell me a little bit about what you think about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have written in the past and spoken about this, and I have a real interest in comparing what surgeons do with what athletes do, for example. And in any situation where you're putting yourself through 4, 5, 6 hours of performing, you're going to get fatigued. There are going to be human factors that come into it. And I think historically and culturally, we've just had to get through it. And often we get through it either because we're being pressurized by institutions to get case volume through. And in these non-socialized healthcare system, time is money, as it were. But also that this sort of particularly the way that surgery developed over the years, that you just wanted to have this appearance of it's fine, 5-hour operation, no problems, and you just get through it. But we know from any performance industry, 5 hours in, whether you're playing tennis or you're operating, 5 hours in, you're not going to be the same person as you were 3 or 4 hours before that. So I think that is a real concern in surgery, which finally is being appreciated.
And is that also being appreciated now by the senior management of the hospital? Are they taking that seriously now? Because I mean, a few years ago when I talked to different senior management, it was just like...
Yeah, I think here, what we've seen in the last few years is that senior management and hospital have got a greater buy-in of what's going on in the OR. And with that, they can understand and begin to see those pain points along the way. And I think they are more amenable to those conversations because a lot of these are intangibles. So it's very difficult to try and demonstrate, well, fatigue made this happen or fatigue made that happen. But I think they're beginning to be sympathetic to that. So you absolutely need management buy-in. But I also think that it's the literature itself. We've moved on from have we removed the cancer or have we treated the disease to actually how do we make the whole experience for both patient, surgeon, staff better? And we're beginning to see that being in the literature. And once things are in the literature, then you've got something to support that with in terms of evidence.
And do you see technology as also being one of the ways to help that problem?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to understand what the technology is doing for our problem. So often in the past, we may have been seen to be just using a technology or starting a technology just because it's a new technology. But what are we actually trying to achieve? And if we are trying to, for example, take the benefits of a robotic procedure in a situation for one reason or the other that there isn't a robot available, or the department don't believe in robotic surgery in general, how can we take some of those benefits that we all know exist and put that into a laparoscopic situation or even into an open situation? Yeah. And one may be, can we reduce fatigue? It might be, can we reduce the footprint in the OR? Can we make this surgery more efficient, perhaps? And I think they're the kind of ways that we look at technology, rather than it's one solution and that one solution does everything.
Yeah, and that's interesting. You talk a little bit there about bringing robotic elements in. You would expect that robots will be everywhere then, but I can tell you that, I've seen that in a lot of the, in the US, for example, in ASCs, there's a low penetration. In some of the private clinics across Europe and the UK, even the private sector in the UK, there's a lower number of robots than you would expect. Yeah. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think, obviously one of the things is cost. And it may even be the lack of appropriate assistance to us and training. It may well be that the footprint of a smaller clinic doesn't have the capacity to take on a big robot, for example. But, what are the advantages of a robot? If you are operating with a robot, you want to have better vision, better control. You want to make the procedure more efficient. And you can do that and bring those aspects in, perhaps, without actually having a robot. So one of the things that we look at is camera control, for example. And in camera control in traditional laparoscopy, you are, to some degree, at the mercy of your assistant. And whether that be the availability of an assistant, but it may also be the experience of an assistant. In robotics, since you are controlling that yourself, you can then predict what's my next step. Or like playing chess, I know in robotics what I'm going to be doing 5 steps ahead. Yeah. Now my assistant, however experienced they are not always going to get that right. So that in itself, you can hypothesize, will translate to less error, less problems, better outcomes. Now, to prove that scientifically, it's difficult. But we can say anecdotally that is something which is a benefit. So if we can translate that, for example, take that out of robotics and put that into a laparoscopic situation, clearly you're now beginning to see that some of those benefits are translatable.
And that's interesting you say that, because one of the things that I've observed over many, many years is that often when you have an assistant in these, they're not really assisting, they're being a human scope holder quite often. Yeah. And I don't see them. One of the things I saw with the change to robotics was the bedside assistant really became an assistive partner. Yeah. within the procedure. I mean, do you think that we can take elements of that and make it so that your assistants at the bedside become more collaborative within the operation than just literally a retractor holder and a scope holder?
Yeah, so we can call that passive assistance versus active assistance. But there is a skill in both. Yes. So we talked a little bit about that passive assistance in terms of a camera holder, but even assistance in terms of active assistance in laparoscopy, why can't we have active assistance in laparoscopy in that same manner? And I think that is a huge benefit. What have we got in a multi-arm robot? You've got an extra assistant, but that assistant is you. Yeah. You can put the graspers where you want to put it. You can set the anatomy up how you wish for it to be seen, and then progress how you want to progress. So that's another thing. Can we translate that aspect of robotics and put that into laparoscopy? Yeah. So we move from that passive camera holder to that more active assistant. And again, this then becomes regardless of experience. Yeah. So whether you've got a true assistant versus an experienced colleague, you have then taken over and you're in charge of all of that.
So you're talking there about a gradation. You're not talking about it's either a robot or it's laparoscopy. We're talking about this gradation. Can you take some of the best elements of robotics, yeah, and have them in for more low acuity settings, low acuity procedures?
Yeah, great question. I mean, look, I think some of the companies, particularly those that are working on the software side, have seen that this is an opportunity to do that. And when we look at robots, is it the hardware that's important? Is it the software that's important? Or is it a marriage between the two? And it pretty much is a marriage between the two. So therefore, we can take some of those software components, for example, to better build the hardware or get better hardware or more active hardware in laparoscopy. So we're beginning to get smarter tools in laparoscopy. And I think that's what we want to see. I think it's not a question of it's either a robot or it's laparoscopy. It's like, let's have some of the best bits of, as many best bits of robotics that we can take out of that and put into laparoscopy.
And I know you're a bit of a futurist, and you talk about the software there, so you're very in tune with that. But wouldn't be a conversation today without talking a little bit of AI and a little bit of where AI and software is going to have a place in, say, laparoscopy.
Well, if you look at, if I was going to buy a car, I'd go into the showroom. I expect it to have 4 wheels, a steering wheel, an accelerator, and a brake. So that's some of the hardware components of it. And doors and a roof and somewhere to sit. What differentiates one car from another these days? And it often is that clever software. So does it do this? Does it do that? And we've seen the dashboard of a new car, whatever it may be. It doesn't matter what end of the spectrum it is. The dashboard of a new car compared to even 10 years ago, or certainly 20 years ago, completely different. And it's that dashboard which in effect is the manifestation of the software. And if we've seen that in other industries where the differentiator is often software and allowing that hardware to be more clever, then why can't we see that in traditional laparoscopy? We're seeing it now on robots. So what differentiates robot 1 from robot 2 to robot 3? Many of these differentiators are not standalone companies or standalone products. They're value adds for the robot. So can we not have value adds for laparoscopy? And if we do, I think that in itself is a win. And we've seen some of these robot companies, they will have a software team that may be in another part of the world that are developing clever software. But often that clever software is agnostic, and it isn't necessarily going to go just on that robot platform. It could go on any robot platform or any hub system. And I think that's where we see the marriage of the two. But rather than just stick to robot, why not move it into laparoscopy?
Well, all said, I think it's exciting times in both robotics, laparoscopy, and the space in between.
I think so. It's a great time to be a surgeon.
Yeah.